They say she wore black not just for grief, but for war. The townsfolk of Dry Willow watched from their porches and dusty windows as Sarah Blackthorne passed down Main Street, boots soft on the boardwalk, black skirts brushing the ground like the shadow of a storm. 6 months had passed since her husband, Marshal Jacob Blackthorne, was gunned down outside the saloon in broad daylight. The Red Rock gang hadn't even hidden their hands. 3 shots, 1 laugh, and they rode out before the body hit the dirt. Since then, Dry Willow hadn't seen justice, only silence. Sarah did not cry at the funeral. She stood like a monument, veiled and unmoving, her gloved hands clenched around a folded letter the marshal had left in his desk. She buried him alone, then returned to the modest ranch on the edge of Dead Man's Ridge. Folks said a woman couldn't hold that place on her own. But winter came and went, and there she remained, tending horses, mending fences, and riding into town for flour and mail, always alone. No one knew the whole of her past. Some whispered she was a schoolteacher from back east. Others claimed she once rode shotgun on a Wells Fargo coach through Apache country. What they all agreed on was that she carried herself like a woman who'd seen worse than heartbreak. The wind had been cruel that morning. Dust clung to the windows, and the clouds above the highlands curled like watching wolves. Sarah had felt it in her chest before she saw the sign. A door left swinging at the barn, the horse restless in its pen, a silence that wasn't quite empty. Her hand slipped behind her apron and found the cool metal of the revolver strapped to her side. But it wasn't fast enough. The first blow came from behind, a rifle but to the ribs that stole her breath. She staggered, reached for the gun, but another hand twisted her wrist and yanked it free. Faces loomed, masked, grimed with trail dust and greed. There were 4 of them, maybe 5. She counted as they closed in, the same way Jacob had taught her. A coarse voice laughed. The lady still got fight, just like her man. But he didn't make it long, did he? She didn't scream. She spat blood on the ground and locked eyes with the man closest to her, the one with the cruel scar across his cheek. She knew that face. Caleb Brant, second in command to the Red Rock gang, wanted in 5 counties. He grinned like the devil had lent him his smile. They bound her hands with wire and threw her across the back of her own horse. The world tilted as hooves thundered, dirt rising in spirals behind them. The town was too far, too quiet. No one would come. Dry Willow had learned to mind its own business. The ride into the mountains was long and brutal. The sun dropped behind the ridges, like a blade sliding into a sheath. Cold gathered fast at higher altitudes, and Sarah shivered through her thin dress, her face set in stone. The gang dragged her into a narrow pass above the pine line and hid among jagged rocks and windswept caves. Their voices bounced off the cliffs as they built a fire and tethered the horses. They tossed her into the back of a shallow cave, hands still bound, ankles roped tight. One of them lit a lantern and left it nearby, the flickering light dancing on the stone. Caleb squatted beside her. "Tell me, Blackthorne," he said, picking his teeth with a matchstick. "Did your husband leave you a map? Or was he the type to take secrets to the grave?" She stared at him, eyes dry and cold. "Jacob left me nothing but your name. Said if I ever met Caleb Brant, I should put a bullet in his head and burn whatever was left." He slapped her hard across the face, and the cave echoed with it. Her head snapped sideways, but she didn't cry out. Blood welled on her lip, and her smile was red. "That's all right," he said, standing. "We got time. And pressure makes gold show its shine." The others laughed, pouring coffee and whiskey in equal measure. She watched them, counting again, noting who stood where, who was armed, who was drunk. Her fingers worked behind her back, slowly testing the sharp edge of the hairpin tucked beneath her collar. The wire cut her skin, but she didn't stop. Pain meant nothing now. She'd seen what happened to women taken by men like this. She wouldn't let it end that way. Outside the cave, the wind howled down the slopes, catching in the pines like a voice calling from the dark. Somewhere far above, an owl cried once and went silent. Caleb turned to one of his men. "No fire in the morning. Smoke carries. We hole up till nightfall again, then move south. She'll talk by then, or she won't need a tongue." One of the younger men shifted nervously. What if the law tracks us? Caleb sneered. Ain't no law in these hills. That town ain't sending anyone. They're too scared, and the widow's not worth dying over. Sarah closed her eyes and leaned against the rock wall. Her jaw ached, her stomach churned, but her mind stayed sharp. She repeated her husband's voice in her head, the way he used to speak when cleaning his rifle. If you can't shoot first, wait till they blink. Men blink more than they breathe. She would wait. She would bleed, but she would not break. Outside, the fire crackled and popped. The men laughed. They were too comfortable. They thought they'd won. She let her head rest for a moment, then opened her eyes and went back to cutting. The cave grew darker as the firelight faded. One man stood watch at the mouth, the others curled in their bedrolls, rifles near, but not ready. Caleb snored like a bear, and above them, on a ledge watching from the rocks, a figure crouched in silence. Wrapped in a long coat, face half covered by a scarf, he waited until the fire died low. He studied their patterns, counted heads. The moonlight glinted off the barrel of the rifle in his hand. He did not wear a star. His face was marked by years of sun and scars, and his eyes held the kind of pain no court could sentence. But he watched the Red Rock Gang with the patience of a hunter and the weight of old debts. Below, Sarah's wire snapped with a soft ping, masked by the wind. She closed her eyes for just a breath and whispered to herself, "One blink." The figure above vanished into the darkness, moving without sound, swallowed by the wind. And so the tale of Sarah Blackthorne began again, this time, not as the widow of a lawman, but as the bait in a mountain trap that had yet to be sprung. Long before he was a ghost in the high country, Elias Boon was a name men muttered when the whiskey hit their nerves. Not a man of many words, nor one to ride with a gang unless the odds demanded it. Elias had carved his reputation in the shadows, quick hands, quiet boots, and a way of vanishing when bullets stopped flying. Now he lived alone in the mountains. His cabin, little more than timber lashed with stone, clung to the ridge like a burr on a wolf's tail. It stood above a narrow gulch, guarded by scree slopes and cold winds that warned off all but the most desperate. He trapped beaver in the spring, dug for silver in the summer, and when winter came, he smoked meat and read from the old journal he kept, one of the few things that tied him to the man he used to be. Elias hadn't drawn on anyone in 3 years, not since the bank in Calico where things went bad and too many good folks bled. That day he rode off without a word, not because he feared the noose, but because something in him twisted when he saw the face of the woman who'd lost her husband in the crossfire. She didn't scream. She just looked at him, eyes hollow as an empty church. He carried that look with him every day since. The sound came just after dusk. It wasn't loud, just the crack of hooves and loose shale and the sharp, angry voices of men who thought they were alone. Elias had been checking his snare lines when the wind shifted and brought the scent of smoke. He crouched by a granite outcrop, still as stone, and watched the line of riders snake into a hollow 2 ridges east. He recognized the colors: dirty red bandanas, black hats. One man rode with a scarred palomino, another carried a rifle with silver inlay. The Red Rock Gang. Like weeds, they always came back. Elias watched as they tethered horses and dragged someone from the saddle, slim frame, black skirts, hands bound. He squinted through the twilight, heart tightening. The woman didn't scream. She held her head high, even as they shoved her into a shallow cave. He'd seen her before. Dry Willow's widow, Sarah Blackthorne. He leaned back against the stone and closed his eyes. The name came heavy. Blackthorne. Jacob. A lawman from another life. Years ago, outside of Bisbee, Jacob had caught him. Gun drawn, cuffs in hand, justice in his eyes. But instead of hauling him in, he let Elias walk free. "I don't believe every man stays what he is," Jacob had said. "One day you'll prove me right, or die trying." Elias hadn't believed him then, but he'd never forgotten. Now, watching the gang throw Jacob's widow into the dirt like a sack of grain, something old and sharp stirred in Elias's chest. Regret maybe, or something more dangerous. He returned to his cabin without lighting a lamp, moved like a man walking into a storm. From under the floorboards, he pulled an oiled satchel, 2 Colts, a long knife, and a coil of fuse. He checked each weapon with quiet care, loaded and holstered with the ease of someone who hadn't truly let them go. By midnight, he was back above the hollow, belly flat on a high ledge, rifle braced against a stone lip. Below, the gang lounged by the fire, their laughter crude, their guard down. The woman sat near the cave wall, unmoving. He could take 2 before the others scattered. 3, if the wind stayed steady. But Elias didn't fire. Not yet. Killing them in the dark wouldn't end this. They'd scatter, regroup, right again. And Sarah? She'd still be a pawn in someone else's game. No, it needed a different hand. Instead, he watched. He noted who drank too much, who slept first. He marked the trail they came in on, and the ridge they'd ride out through. He mapped the land in his mind, the bottlenecks, the loose stone, the deadfall from last winter's storm. The mountains weren't just his refuge. They were his weapon. As dawn began to bleed into the sky, Elias slipped down the back of the ridge and into the brush. He moved silent as smoke, cutting horse tethers and scattering them into the hills. He found their canteens and poured out half, filled them again from a stream laced with bitter roots that would turn stomachs and minds cloudy. He left no prints, no sign. And all the while, he circled closer to the cave. By the time the sun hit the rocks, one man was already groaning from cramps. Another cursed at the vanished horses. The gang began to fray at the edges, snapping at each other, watching shadows. Elias crouched in a thicket, just 20 yards from the cave mouth. He saw her shift, subtle but real. She wasn't tied anymore. Her hands moved behind her back, slow and deliberate. She was waiting, biding time. He almost smiled. Sarah Blackthorne wasn't the kind to break. He retreated as the wind rose again, heading toward a narrow gorge half a mile east. There, the land dipped into a trap, a twist of stone and scrub where sound echoed and bullets ricocheted. He knew it well. Years ago, he'd led a posse into it and watched them fall apart under confusion and fear. Now, he'd lead the Red Rock Gang there. Not for money, not for vengeance, but because Jacob Blackthorne had once seen something in him, and because Sarah Blackthorne was about to show the world that no one rides into the mountains and takes from the wind what belongs to the storm. He faded into the trees, one hand on the grip of his revolver, heart steady. The game had begun. By the time the sun cleared the eastern ridges, the Red Rock Gang was restless. The horses had vanished in the night, their tracks scattered by wind and slope. 2 men were doubled over from gut pain, one dry-heaving behind a boulder, the other swearing his insides were trying to crawl out. Caleb Brant paced like a caged wolf, boots grinding dust and frustration into the stone. Sarah sat cross-legged near the mouth of the cave, hands now loosely bound with a strip of her own shawl, nothing but show. Her wrists were raw, but her mind was razor-sharp. She'd seen one of the horses bolt just before dawn, a dark shape disappearing into the trees. That didn't happen without help. And help didn't come this far into the mountains unless it knew what it was doing. She let herself hope, but only just. Caleb turned on her, eyes bloodshot. "You been praying, widow? Think some mountain angels coming down for you?" She looked up, calm as water. "No, but the wind's changed." He laughed, sharp and forced, then grabbed the nearest man. "We're moving. No more waiting. Load her up. If she slows us down, cut her loose and leave her for the wolves." As they dragged her to her feet, Sarah's fingers brushed the hem of her dress, where a shard of glass was stitched into the lining, a trick she'd learned while living with Jacob among bounty men. Her heart quickened. Timing now mattered more than anything. They rode south, skirting a ridge trail Elias Boon had counted on. Above them, he tracked every step, a wraith among the rocks. His rifle stayed slung for now. He wasn't here to pick them off, but to guide them. Toward the canyon, the land dropped sharply past a break in the trees. An ancient wash gouged through sandstone, narrow at the neck, opening like a clawed hand further in. Dry pine littered the floor, branches thick with old pitch, brittle as paper. Elias had prepared it the night before, dragging fallen limbs into a tight pile behind a bend, laying a fuse downwind. It only needed the right spark. As the gang approached, the trail narrowed. Caleb cursed the terrain, but kept pushing. Sarah swayed in her saddle, head low, jaw tight. Her fingers worked the glass loose from the hem. When it finally slipped free into her palm, she didn't hesitate. She cut the new bindings, slow and steady. The air shifted, still, then electric. Then the shot rang out, not from below, but above, a crack of thunder that sent the lead rider's hat flying and his horse rearing. Chaos exploded. Caleb drew his rifle, firing blindly into the cliffs. A second shot punched into the dirt beside him. The gang scattered, shouting, dragging Sarah with them toward the cover of the canyon, exactly where Elias wanted them. He dropped low and lit the fuse with a match. Smoke curled along the pine pitch, snaking toward the fire trap he'd built. Then he moved, swift, low, silent, cutting downhill to close the net. Inside the canyon, the gang shoved Sarah against a rock outcrop. Guns pointed everywhere. One man screamed at shadows. Another fumbled his canteen, with shaking hands. No one knew where the shots came from, or how many attackers were in the cliffs. It felt like 100. It was one. Then the fire came. A sound like bones snapping in a furnace roared to life. The trap ignited, flames racing along the canyon's dry floor, leaping up the walls in a curtain of heat. Smoke billowed. The gang panicked. Move! Caleb barked, waving toward the far end, but it was already closing with fire. In the chaos, Sarah made her move. She shoved one outlaw sideways, yanked the pistol from his holster, and dropped him with a shot to the gut. Another turned, gun raised, but she was faster. Her second shot shattered his shoulder. He collapsed, screaming. She turned the weapon toward Caleb. He stared at her like he'd never seen a woman before. "You think you got grit?" he spat. "I buried grit. I survived worse than you." He fired. The bullet grazed her side, searing heat and blood across her ribs. But she didn't fall. She shot him in the thigh. He buckled, howling. Then Elias was there. He stepped through the smoke like death made flesh, coat flaring, eyes glowing with firelight. His rifle cracked once, and the last outlaw standing went down with a scream. Sarah staggered, still holding the gun, blood dripping from her side. She met Elias's gaze across the burning haze. "Boon," she said through clenched teeth. He gave a slow nod. "Mrs. Blackthorn." Behind them, the fire cracked louder, consuming the last dry timber. Caleb moaned, crawling, one leg useless. Elias walked over, kicked the rifle from his grasp, and leveled his own barrel at the man's head. Sarah raised a hand. "No, let him crawl. Let him remember." Elias studied her a moment, then lowered the rifle. Caleb didn't dare meet their eyes. He began dragging himself toward the smoke. Sarah swayed, and Elias stepped forward, catching her before she collapsed. She was breathing hard, her face pale but fierce. "Not bad," he murmured. "For a widow." She gave a weak laugh. "Not bad for a ghost." Together, they moved toward the mouth of the canyon, leaving the flames and the wreckage behind. The fire had done its work. The Red Rock gang was finished. But the mountain wasn't done with them yet. The sun was low when Elias and Sarah reached the clearing. The canyon lay behind them, its smoke still curling up into the sky. But the wind had shifted, carrying the smell of ash toward the east. The remnants of the Red Rock gang were scattered, every one of them left to the elements, save for Caleb, who had vanished into the brush like a wounded animal, dragging his useless leg behind him. Elias hadn't cared to follow. For the first time in hours, Elias let the weight of his rifle settle, fingers brushing the smooth wood of its stock. The mountain stretched out before him, vast and indifferent, but they felt different today. Not like a refuge, but a reminder. He glanced at Sarah, who moved slowly beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her face was pale, her dress torn, but there was a quiet strength in her posture, something that seemed to pulse beneath the exhaustion and pain. "You should rest," Elias said, voice rough with a gravel he hadn't bothered to clear in years. She shook her head, though the movement was faint. "I've been resting long enough." She stopped a few paces away, looking down at the dust beneath her boots, and for a long moment, Elias didn't know what to say. The canyon was still alive with the crackling of the fire, the land healing slowly in its wake. The wind picked up again, cold and bitter, as if it too was ready to move on. You didn't have to help me, Sarah said, her voice quiet, but firm. I was never meant to make it out of there. Elias said nothing, letting her words hang between them. The distance in her voice was the distance of years, of a life filled with loss and fear. She had been a widow long before the Red Rock gang had set their sights on her. She'd lived a quiet life in a world that had no place for quiet. I saw the way you looked at me, Sarah continued, her gaze meeting his now, like you didn't know whether to kill me or save me. Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He could lie, but something in his chest kept the truth from his lips. He hadn't known what to do with her, or with the ghost of the man she'd once loved, the man who had shown Elias mercy when mercy had no place in the world. I don't owe you an explanation, Elias said after a long silence, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they didn't carry the weight he meant them to. Sarah wasn't looking at him anymore. Her attention was on the land around them, the vast openness, the lonely mountains that seemed to echo back every sound. Then why did you come for me? She asked, the question slow, measured, as if testing a fragile thread between them. Elias took a deep breath, the scent of the earth filling his lungs. The air felt cleaner now, purer. He wasn't used to feeling this way, to feeling like the land wasn't just something to survive in, but something that could be lived on. It had been too long since he'd known that feeling. Too long since he'd allowed himself to see what he was capable of beyond the blood on his hands. He could have left her there. She was already dead to the world, a pawn in a game that had long lost its meaning. But there was something about her, the quiet defiance in the way she held herself, the way she hadn't begged for help even when they dragged her through the dirt. She had survived where others would have crumbled. And for the first time in years, Elias hadn't wanted to watch someone die. I came because I knew it wasn't right, he said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. Because there's only so much I can let go before it catches up to me. You reminded me of that. Sarah turned to him, her brow furrowing slightly, as though trying to make sense of the words. She wasn't expecting an answer, not really. She was only trying to understand why the man who'd saved her wasn't the one she'd expected. I don't need saving, she said, though the conviction in her voice was thin, like the last thread of a rope about to snap. I never did. Elias studied her, the way she stood, the quiet strength in her gaze. He knew what it was like to fight battles that no one saw. Battles fought in the mind, not the body. Battles where the enemy was the silence, the weight of days gone by without meaning, without purpose. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. No one gets through this world alone, Sarah. Not for long. She didn't answer him immediately. She only nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement, before turning back toward the horizon. The mountains were fading into the distance, the night creeping over the land. Elias followed her gaze, the heavy silence lingering like a storm waiting to break. I can't stay here, she said, voice tinged with finality. I've lost too much. Too many years. Elias nodded. He understood. He knew what it was like to leave things behind, people, places, lives. There came a point when there was nothing left to stay for but the ghosts. The question was whether those ghosts would ever let go, whether they could ever be buried in the dust of the past. You don't have to, he said, his voice firm. You're free now. They won't come after you anymore. She gave a soft, bitter laugh. Do you think that matters? Freedom's just another word for empty. Elias looked at her, seeing the pain beneath the words, the weight she carried even now, even after everything that had happened. There was something raw and exposed in her that reminded him of himself, the same hardened exterior masking the soft, broken parts inside. He wasn't sure what made him speak, but the words left his mouth before he could stop them. Then let's fill the emptiness together. She met his eyes then, her expression unreadable for a moment before it softened, just slightly. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic revelation. Only two people who had seen too much of the world's darkness to hope for much light. But in that moment, as the wind whispered across the canyon and the night settled over the land, they both knew something had changed. The canyon had claimed the fire, the dust had settled, and what remained was the heart beneath it all. And for the first time in a long time, Elias felt the weight of it, a heart that might still beat, might still find its way home. They walked side by side into the gathering dark, the mountains stretching endlessly before them, and the dust of the past blowing away on the wind.